Welcome back to the Church Resource, where we talk about the best resources for church leaders and lay people. I'm Lucas Pinckard, and I'm here with the Doctor.
What's up? How you doing, Lucas Pinckard?
Since the last time we talked, did you do any research into why that ram is on your hat?
Not at all.
Okay, well, I didn't give you a lot of time to do that. Yeah, I did, but
that's all right.
Y'all research and put it in the comments. Today we're talking about something that has really been a push. I would think probably maybe the last almost 20 years now, and that is digital discipleship platforms.
Yes.
That's a mouthful.
It is a lot.
Digital discipleship platform.
I'm proud of you,
bro. That's got more syllables than some paragraphs I've written. So the digital discipleship platform, and really with so much in the last 5 years because of COVID,
right?
We've seen so many people that have gone online for different things. The pros, cons. We want to talk about some of that stuff. Okay. How to determine whether or not a digital discipleship platform is. Can we call it somebody else? Something else? We can call it somebody else.
Online study. I don't know. Yeah, right.
DDS.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah, because both church loves acronyms.
Yeah,
baby.
That's it.
Yeah. So are these platforms worth investing in? At what level? And the big one is. How honest do I need to be when I'm signing up for it? Because, those licenses are tricky.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
Yeah, they
so
are.
We've looked at a few of these. I think, as immediately whenever you think of this, you think of like Bluefish TV, which became Right Now Media in 2011,
right?
Which is probably the most prominent. They're the ones we get the most phone calls from that do this kind of stuff. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
We both looked at some stuff on there. So when you guys, because you use...
We do.
Digital platforms.
We do.
We currently do not.
Okay.
And that's not because we have any kind of thing against them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because we've had to make different decisions for
right.
our congregation,
right.
what works best for us.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What things influenced y'all's decision to move towards this type of platform?
Right. So, just my, having planted the church, right? And especially in those earlier years, managing, the scarcity of resources, one of the things that I conclude, and I've said this in one of our earlier episodes, is that in my opinion, right, technology levels the ministry playing field, right? Especially, if you can... even with the podcast or live streaming, nobody knows the size of your church, how many people, are serving and not serving, because you look like every other congregation in terms of the quality of what's being produced. So for me, technology and incorporating that in ministry was important because we didn't have the head count. So online platforms kind of became literally a virtual assistant to kind of help us do ministry. And so that was just always as a foundational kind of mindset that we had. With the pandemic, then it became clearer that we needed to, for us at least, having a platform that had already done all the hard work for us, curating it and, vetting for the most part, was a good investment for us, because during the pandemic, people weren't coming to the building. And so utilizing the online platform at least gave us the opportunity to still be proactive in terms of the resources that we were making available to our people, and also teaching through that.
Yeah, one of the big advantages to these online platforms is that if in a church that has a scarcity of leaders, right, that there is something about the master teacher style of a lot of this Bible study stuff where, hey, we're going to watch the 5-minute video or the 10-minute video or whatever, and then we're going to discuss it, that takes away the big intimidating portion of teaching the Bible study lesson or the Sunday school lesson or whatever. And then there's also the, hey, I left my book at home. What do I do? Right? Because there are some great traditional, written literature Bible studies that, people can come in and do. And if you kind of read off the page, then you're good to go. And it's enough to where you don't have to have a really dynamic leader at the front, that the curriculum kind of takes care of some of that stuff for you. Not everything, but it takes care of some of that stuff for you. Well, if that person leaves their book at home, well, then you're hosed. Whereas like with this stuff, it gives you the opportunity to do that. And you are always learning, whether the material is good or bad. And we'll get into some of that stuff in a minute. You're almost always learning from somebody who is very dynamic and captivating and kind of attention grabbing. So when one of the things you have to look at is that the case. Now, the flip side of that is that if you are not scarce in leadership, you can actually end up in a place where you are neglecting leadership development because you're leaning so heavily on the guys that are behind the video. So how do you guys balance that out? Because not only are you on this platform, but you at your church also have a really robust leadership development plan. How do you keep those things in balance?
Right. So part of it is, some of these platforms will allow you to, for lack of a better way of saying it, set up a channel, right, where you can, in advance, target resources that you approve, to be listed
for your people,
for your people, for your channel. I mean, it doesn't mean they don't have access to the full library, but if this is the Antioch stuff, this is what we do for leadership. This is how we have it set up, blah blah blah, and at least you can steer people to the content that you've already identified to be used, and we manage that part of it. And the other piece is, over the years, as we've gotten, obviously the pandemic situation has changed significantly. We just ultimately adopted or accepted the fact that a hybrid model was probably going to be more likely for our discipleship. Yeah. Meaning, we started looking at the online virtual stuff as being an add-on to our standard kind of in-person stuff rather than the primary thing. Right. And so that's kind of how we've kept it at, held the lines and, held it in the road and keep it balanced and not allow people, frankly, to get lazy. Right. But in places, but we felt like we needed to still use it because outside of the church and in the marketplace, this is clearly the direction that most of our members are working in, right? Given our context, right? Yeah. So they're volunteering, but they're being vetted online, right? They're being trained for their volunteer service at whatever organization. They're being trained online, right? So in their jobs, a lot of their stuff is online, right? So in the church, we just had to accept that probably having some degree of this was going to appeal to folks in the congregation, and there'll be others who are just viewed as anathema. Yeah, so this was a big step in us for determining not to go the digital route. Yeah, is we had probably about 60% of our congregation that they're in the workforce, they're using all of this stuff all the time, and then between 35 and 40 that are that elderly group that don't want to mess with it, or their kids, right. And so they wouldn't really have direct access to it unless mom or dad gave it to them anyway, right? So you have that, and then you've got this other 60%. And so we went and we talked with the 60% because we're like, we know you're going to be the ones that use this. And the thing that we got back as feedback when we were kind of doing these surveys is that they felt a lot of digital fatigue. They were tired of being on screens. That the idea for some of our people that we were going to have them download one more app was just they're like, you know what, I can't do it. I've got one app that I, especially people that are sort of in that mid-level management position. This is the app that the executives use. This is the app that I have to use for this. This is the other one. And now I've got to do all these Zoom meetings. Like, I don't want one more app. I don't need something else popping up in my inbox. Just that whole thing sort of gave them a lot of stress. And this goes back a little bit to the conversation we were having in the last episode about these sort of anxiety-inducing things, which are our devices. Right. So I think knowing that your congregation is in a place where they, hey, you know what, having something on the phone or on our tablets or on our TVs at home, right? Because a lot of smart TVs, they've got the apps for it. Like, that sounds great. Versus in the situation we were in where they were like,
that sounds so stressful to me. I have to go to one more thing. But
that's good.
Yeah. So the book Anxious Generation was talking about the average student between ages of, I think it was ages like 10 and 17, that the average student gets 190 notifications a day on their phone.
Gee whiz.
And so it's like it's constantly pinging, and so that even the device itself becomes such a source of anxiety that they just didn't want one more thing to have to do. So I think one of the pieces that we have to look at is exactly what you were talking about. What does your congregation want to do? Now, obviously, there's a lot of pastor and elder-led churches where you're like, hey, you know what? This is a decision we're making. I think this is where the Holy Spirit's leading us. That's perfect. But if you're on the fence about it, like, talk to your people.
Indeed.
Because you don't want to end up paying for something that they're not going to use and then end up in not just like in a contract that now you got to bust, but also end up with a discipleship material that, you know, you come back after 6 weeks, you're really charged up and you realize that the 60 people that you're supposed to be ministering to haven't been doing any of their Bible study stuff because they don't want to mess with the
They don't want to touch it.
Yeah.
And, you know, to piggyback on that is to not necessarily marry yourself to only one use of the resource.
Yeah.
So like for, you know, you alluded earlier to, you know, a situation where you don't necessarily have strong leaders.
Right.
Well, what we found is that for our small groups, right, it was ideal, right? Because most of our small groups are not lay ministers, right? They're not involved in leadership per se, or leadership proper.
Right.
And teaching was not their forte, but they wanted to be involved in the small group ministry.
Yeah.
And so that was perfect.
Yeah.
You know, it works better than, or for individual discipleship, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so we, to your point, because we had people that had app fatigue and digital fatigue and all that. But over time, we were able to take this principle of technology can be our friend if we use it well, right? Coupled with the reality that some folks didn't want to fool with it.
Yeah.
You know, even though, you know, you described it beautifully. And so not just saying, okay, this is absolutely the way that we're going to do all of our discipleship.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you know, cutting with a scalpel. You know, whether say with a scalpel rather than an axe or whatever, and figure out what are those places where it can prove to be a resource to you. And that's where the real question is, because at the end of the day, we're coming back to money.
Well,
You got to come back to money because it's not free.
No,
right?
it's not.
You know, you got to pay for it.
None of the stuff that we typically use is free.
Correct.
Right. There are a couple of things that are out there. Open.church has a lot of free resources on there if that's a route that you want to go. But again, whether or not that's the route you want to go or whether you want to go a paid route, you still have to have all of these same discussions, because if people aren't into it, then it's useless, right? No matter how much you're paying or not paying for it.
That's right. That's right.
So this is obviously one of those things that can be of a high benefit if you've got your people that are using it, especially because one piece that we haven't really gotten into is that there is a lot of kids programming on there.
Yeah.
That is really, really well done. Right? I'm thinking particularly of Mike Naraki, the guy who used to voice Larry the cucumber on the VeggieTales stuff. So one of the co-founders of VeggieTales, he's got a show called the Dead Sea Squirrels. All right? Dead Sea Squirrels is a kids show. It's about these kids who interact with these two squirrels who have been alive since the time of Jesus, and they're able to tell them like firsthand accounts of like everything that they saw Jesus do whenever they're walking through Bible stories from a squirrel's perspective, right? So it's different when Zacchaeus is in the tree with the squirrel that's like right by him when you hear that perspective.
Yeah.
So it's cute. It's really great, biblically grounded stuff. And there's a lot of really good things on there that are part of these packages. That's another consideration is like, are you giving people by purchasing one of these for your church or purchasing the amount of licenses, some good family things that they can watch together that will encourage biblical conversations and gospel conversations in the home, and using that as a way to show them, hey, this is an added benefit.
Right.
Is that, yeah, okay, well, now you don't have to worry about, what's on the Paramount Plus app that your kid might stumble onto, because they're looking at cartoons and they've got, Tumbleleaf and Curious George and then South Park, because those are all Paramount Plus cartoons.
Right.
There's one of those you definitely don't want your kid clicking on.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's that element to it where you don't have to worry about some of that stuff that I think is a really important thing. The next thing that I want to ask you, because I know this is a conversation you and I have both had and we've struggled with, is what do we do with things on those platforms that are theologically in contradiction to what we believe the Word of God says? Because this is a really, really tough thing to answer.
That's tough. Fortunately, I don't know if it's because our people not using it.
All right, you're not messing with a lot of it,
Yeah,
right?
And so it hadn't come up. But I've, in trying to, vet for our channel,
Right.
Looked at some stuff, and I'm like, wow. Yeah, I don't really think that's what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And
right?
and when people have access to it and they're watching it in their homes or, using it in a small group, because that's where it kind of gets you.
Right.
Right. It'll be 12 videos. I'm not watching all 12.
Right.
I just don't. So you watch a few of them. They seem to be solid.
Yeah, it's video 7.
Yeah, it's video 7, man.
It's the one.
That's the one where they say something out of pocket.
Yep.
And now you got to try to fix that.
Yeah.
Right. And so we haven't had a lot of that, but it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. It's out there. And I think how we handle that, right, is you just turn it into a teaching moment. Right. It reminds us that we all need to check the text. I don't want to be preachy, but
Yeah.
Whether that's a student or the pastoral leaders or the discipleship team, whatever, we got to check the text, because people may mean well, but they may be, off.
Yeah. And it is something to note too that like this is not just something that happens in digital formats.
That's right.
Right?
That is right.
And
Books,
there's a lot of people that want to hone in on the, well, this says this, and this is why we don't do digital formats, is because there's this heresy, blah, blah, blah. I've read plenty of stuff that comes out in our quarterlies where I'm sitting in a Bible study class and I'm texting the other leaders of the other Sunday school classes, and I'm like, I hope they get this beforehand. Like, please, please, please explain that these verses do not mean this.
That's right.
That this is not a prescriptive thing. Right. And that's an important thing for us as pastors, as church leaders, to have it top of mind and to continue to vet, because it's easy to ignore those things, particularly when we go to something like a digital format where it's not paper in the hand, where somebody's now relaying to you. They're not looking at it and got the part underlined like, this is wrong.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But instead they're like, no, this guy said something that didn't really sit well with me. And so now you got to go back and find it. So that's an important thing. So there will be some of these platforms that may have teachers that you don't agree with.
Right.
Right. So don't put them on your channel.
Facts.
Right. And there are others that kind of end up in this weird gray area where, like, okay, so when this particular teacher was doing this video series, he was spot on, but now 10 years removed, like, this company paid for him to do that, so they're keeping it on the site. But like, I'm not encouraging anybody to go look at his Instagram page because now it's all like, well, did Jesus really die?
Right.
Like, yeah, he really did.
Yeah.
Right. So there's those types of things. The last one of these theological things, though, that I think really cuts to the quick of a lot of stuff that we have to do, and that as pastors that we have to really guard the sheep against, is when the platform is connected to, whether directly to a church or an organization that has heresy at the top.
Right.
And when do you cut that? Because most of them start off like everything's good, and then just like the parable of the sower, right? You get in that situation where now all of a sudden, the first 15 years of this guy's teaching, we used his church's resources because they were awesome, and now he's baptizing people that obviously have not repented and believed, because he's realizing that's getting him a lot of social capital.
Sure.
So how do you navigate that, and what's the way that you would lead your people through that? I know it's not a situation you guys are in right now, but it is one that a lot of churches have had to face. And as a leadership expert.
Oh, no, see,
Yeah, how
whatever.
How do you lead through that? Because we've had to do this in some other areas, and it's a challenge, man.
Yeah, it probably depends on how entrenched that material is in the life of what you're doing in the church, right? If it's a one-off course, a book that you used, right, it's just all of a sudden it's not being used anymore.
Yeah.
But if it's more entrenched, it's a little deeper, right? Take a couple steps back. It's imperative, as you would agree, that we do our research. And I don't really, whether it's a commentary that you're using, check the publisher, check the author's background, to make sure that you're okay generally with their perspective. When it shifts, I think depending on how you have pastored the church, led your particular ministry, talked about the authority of Scripture, it makes it easier, right? If the ministry has not been as definitive on the what is the authority for our ministry, it might be a bit harder. When it's clear that Jesus is the head and the authority for what we do and what we teach comes from the Bible. When you have one of those scenarios where there's heresy at the top, it becomes easy to see and easy to justify why you're making the shift, right? And from our standpoint, I think you would just kind of communicate that, right? I think you would identify it, already have in place whatever the replacement is, and then just move forward. And hopefully I'm not oversimplifying this thing, but I really do believe if you have a resource that you're making available, let's just say is digital and virtual, and it's no longer suiting your needs, or in the case of, there's some deep theological shifts that have taken place since signing on, you just put a period right there, right, and pivot and move in a different direction. I don't think you have to keep eating poison just because you pay for it.
I think that's such a good.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like we wouldn't, if it's not something you would accept at the restaurant, like you're gonna send it back, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, we bought it, so
what? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's different when it's something that your wife cooked for you than it is when it's something that you pay for.
And my wife's cooking is amazing,
incredible. Yeah. Also, yeah. Yep. So I was talking to Timo and one of your guys. We were working on a ministry thing together. We were talking. Both of our wives have experimented with making things with flour, right? And so my wife is making pasta now, and she's like, I think it's gonna be good. I was like, listen, I love that you're doing this, but eggs are like $15 a piece. So whether or not it's delicious, just know I'm eating
every
all
bit
of it. Like it's gonna get eaten,
that's
right?
It.
We don't have to do that with our curriculum.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's
and
right.
really, we probably don't have to do that anyway. But that's just the kind of mindset I've got. I was a bachelor for long enough where I'm like, my guys can handle this. I can take care of it. One of the last considerations, and a lot of churches will find themselves in this place, is how do you do the licensing? And I've talked with several companies that do this, and they each sort of had a different model. One was like, best practices is based off of your attendance. Mm-hmm. Another said best practices was based off of what you feel like the anticipated usage was. Yeah. Right? So if you've got a church of 200 people, that price gap between 200 people and that price gap between the 75 that you think are likely to use it is pretty significant.
Right.
And so for them, for this one service, they were like, it's based off of what you think the usage is. We account for 30% over what you think it will be, and then we can reassess after 90 days or whatever. Okay. Because they know that there's going to be excitement and then attrition. And then the other that says, no, it's based off of your attendance, and we don't account for any of that stuff. But if you're consistently hitting like over 10%, then we'll automatically charge you more.
Oh no!
Yeah, so it's this weird thing that you've got to figure out the balance of. Is that something that we just need to ask the service about, or do you think that there's kind of a best practices of like what that number is to go off of, particularly when you're trying to propose the budget?
Yeah, I have found that the services vary too much.
Yeah.
And the lawyer in me is like looking at the language and saying, okay, how can I be in this lower bracket and not and not be lying?
I love talking to doctor and attorney Chris Respass.
Let me reread this and make sure I'm interpreting it well. No, I think at least right now, like I said, there are a couple services that we use that are subscription based, that are based on either attendance, and there's some that are based on anticipated use. And I think you just use your best. I think the best practice is to be as honest as you can be. And by that meaning, hey, listen, we would love if you had 300 people that were using it, but if you for real only believe it's going to be 30, then it's 30.
Yeah.
Right? Like, put your ego aside, right? Nobody's judging how successful your ministry is by how many licenses you're paying for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, we got 45 logins. Like, who cares?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Really, that just means you're paying for 15 extra, bro.
That's what.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
What about you? I mean, have you found
So that was for us. That was a big thing. Another part of that deciding factor is, when you sit down and you have conversations with your folks, and you're like, hey, listen, this is it. We have to pay for it. This one service we were looking at was pay by attendance, and at the time, we were at a place where our attendance was pretty high. And when we were looking at it, they said, well, would we do this in place of? And we're weighing against what classes would want to, we know would want to stay on the literature. We know at least 30% of our church is likely going to want to stay on the written literature. How does that, change here? Are we really double dipping? Does it make a lot of sense for us to do that or to push them in that direction? And then when we looked at the ones that were based off of potential users, that it became really apparent that we weren't going to have very many potential users, because when we asked that question, like, all right, so this one's based off of attendance, this is kind of what it has, and so they had some questions about it, and this one's based off of potential users, who's going to use it, and then all the hands just went, hey, yeah, probably not. I'm like, okay, well, that kind of answers the question for us as to whether or not it's a good thing, and that's one of those things that those questions are built into the pitch for this, if it's something that you want to look at, if you're doing your due diligence. So, make sure that you're doing your research about these. Have the conversation with the sales guy or the sales lady. Let them know, hey, you've got 10 minutes, because they're going to do the 60-second gospel presentation thing with you at the end. It's like, is there any reason you don't want to ask right now, maybe into your heart today, right? They're going to do that. That's it. So, and whatever service that is, we're picking on right now because it's what you guys use, and it's a valuable service. But those things. So do your research, talk to somebody, figure out how you're going to do it, what's the budget and stuff are going to look like, because so much stuff comes down to that. Like, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it.
That's right.
Move on to the next thing.
That's right.
And then making sure that, when you do make that call, that you're looking at the things from a theological perspective, and making sure that your people know what the best resources are that you think will benefit them the most as a church. And then, the last thing that I would put on that list, which was the very first thing that we talked about, is, man, you got to talk to your people.
Got to.
Even if it is something that is going to make your life that much simpler, and it makes all the sense in the world for you, if it doesn't make much sense for your church to do it, then that's kind of the decision that you got to go with. That's so right. Make sure that you're weighing all of those things. If you've got any resources you think we need to take a look at, whether it's a book or a digital resource, make sure you email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com. That's thechurchresource@gmail.com. Thank you guys for hanging with us. Indeed. And until next time, you guys have good, get give, and we'll see you.
Holla.